Hello there. So 3 weeks ago I made a crazy decision to dive into coding my first game ever without any prior coding experience at all. And let me tell you this week really put me to the test. So if you're new here, I would advise you to check out the other parts as well. Anyways, enough with all that talking. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. It was now finally day 1 and I thought I was ready for some good old coding. The problem was I couldn't really remember what I'd written, so as you may have already guessed, I had to read upon all my code again. Though I did have one goal in mind, and that was I really want to understand the syntax inside the teleport function for the sandworm. It was actually not too difficult to understand, so to keep it simple here, we have an array with 4 teleport points and we can put them inside a for each statement. The for each statement will basically just run for each object that's inside the array, and in this case the syntax will get run through 4 times, so when everything has been ran through, the sandworm will now teleport to the point furthest away. Anyways, after that I felt ready to box with some coding. Since I didn't have much time left, I decided to create a blueprint for a shooting ability for the sandworm. Well, it sure needed some tweaking, but I didn't have much time left, so that had to wait for tomorrow. I started my day off by tweaking the mist that we created yesterday. First of all, decreasing the fire rate, so now it can only shoot once. I also added another spawn point for the projectile, so it can now spawn when the sandworm is facing right or left. I did this by just copying and pasting the body slam code, so it would check whether or not the player was to the left or right, and spawn the projectile to the right side. I also decided to make a health bar for the sandworm, so the player will now have a sense of progression when fighting the boss. I also wanted the health bar to fade in when the player enters the arena and also fade out when the player defeats the boss. For some reason, I decided to do this by coding it instead of just creating a simple animation for it. This meant that I spent around an hour learning about math lerps, and the result is pretty much the same as it would have been if I used the animation, but now I at least know how to use math lerps. I actually enjoyed learning about the lerp function, so I decided to fully understand vectors. Since I was using vectors to calculate the projectile direction, and I use vectors all the time in my game, I hadn't really learned much about vectors in school, even though we had it in class, because I always said like, I would never use this in my daily life, and just didn't care about math and slept through every single math class. So I googled around and found this guy right here. He's actually a really good teacher, and for the first time ever I enjoyed learning about math. Anyways, all that learning made me too tired to start on something new, so I decided to wind off and headed to bed. After yesterday's learning about vectors, I got an idea that I wanted to give a dash ability to the player. I had sort of an idea on how to do this, but in the end I had to find a tutorial and use Mr. ChatGPT. But it was actually really easy to add and understand. So when the player presses left shift, it will basically calculate the direction from the player's movement code and add a velocity to it, and now he will dash. Though I ran into a small bug, and that was whenever the player had dashed, it would store up a velocity. So when the player attacked, it would also fart the rest of the dash out. So to fix this, I simply just had to write RB velocity equals vector 0. This basically means that it resets the velocity inside the rigid body, and that basically just solved the issue. Not gonna lie, but I tried to avoid doing pixel art these past few days, and that is also why the sandworm is currently shooting with the player models. So it was now time to create some pixel art. I first started off by creating the projectile, and I also wanted to match with the spike attack that the sandworm has and make it look like it's spinning. That wasn't actually too difficult, and I'm actually pretty happy about the result. Also created a shooting animation for the sandworm, which was way more difficult, and I spent a crazy amount of time on it since I wanted to look like the sandworm was creating the spike inside the mouth and then blow it out. Okay, maybe shoot it out. Anyways, this is the result. I also had enough time to set up the animation inside Unity, and it turned out to be pretty good. I had a bit more planned for today because one of you guys come to a really cool idea of adding a space labyrinth to the game. Though the space part doesn't really fit into our game theme, but a labyrinth might actually be really cool. So thank you so much for the idea, Pablo. Well, this led to a bigger addition than I thought it would. I had to design a cave tile set, walls for the labyrinth, and also an entrance and exit. This did take a lot of time, but it was actually really nice and relaxing to do. Though when I started off, I struggled really hard to create a ground tile that was going to fit in with the art style of our game. I'm not going to lie when I say this, but this result you see here took me 2.5 hours to create, because I first started off creating a way too complicated ground tile, as you can see here. This result didn't really fit in at all, so I had to create a new one. But my brain wasn't working properly, and I couldn't think of any ideas, and just drew weird doodle designs for like 2 hours until I settled with this one. Very basic, but you know, it does the job. I also added little rocks and sand scratches just to give the ground some detail. The other cave stuff was not too difficult because I just took a lot of inspiration from the tile set I was using for the overworld. Like a lot of inspiration. I created this little idea of how the cave will look like inside Unity when everything's put together. This took the whole day, and I had to wait to implement the tile set inside Unity for tomorrow. Day 5 rolled around the corner and I was excited to put together the cave. I created a new tile map and grid so I could disable the caves if needed. I quickly ran into my first annoying bug or glitch. For some reason Unity adds another row of pixels when rendering a tile set. So if a tile is next to a transparent background, Unity will render part of that transparent background also. This resulted in this annoying look where you can see lines between each tile. I struggled with finding a solution for this and came across a video while I was making breakfast. He said something about using a sprite atlas. So I dragged and dropped all my tile set inside the sprite atlas and pressed preview. And it worked. No more stupid lines in the ground. Well, it was now time to create a labyrinth, which was a bit more time consuming. Designing a labyrinth is actually harder than you think. You want the labyrinth to be sort of difficult and there should also be a reward at the end of the labyrinth. I thought the reward should be rewarding enough that the player found it worth completing. So I decided it was here the dash ability was going to be introduced. That may seem a bit odd, but let me explain. I had an idea in mind that I wanted a forest bus for the forest area, since right now we have skipped a few steps ahead and created a sandworm bus for the desert area. I figured that each bus should have a unique ability that the player can obtain after he has defeated the bus. So in this case, I want to add a mushroom bus as the end fight for the forest area with a dashing ability, like the mushroom enemies. And when the player has defeated the bus, a blocked pathway like a cave will open up, and this is where the player can obtain the new ability. So with all of this said, it was now time to create a design for the reward. I thought the little mushroom fits in well since the bus is actually a huge mushroom. So that is what I did. I also added an animation to it so it's a bit more lively, as you can see here. I tried figuring out on how to switch between scenes without losing in-game progression, but this was a bit too difficult and I was just too tired to focus on learning, so I headed to bed. It was now day 6 and I had to make the last adjustments and additions that I had planned before tomorrow, since I was starting on a new job. So I decided to give up the scenes idea and figured it was way easier to just teleport the player to a new position. On top of that, I felt like the cave entrance didn't look or work as I wanted it to. So instead of the entrance was on one flat layer, I divided it into 3 layers. So essentially it would look like the player enters the cave entrance. There was a tiny detail that got on my nerves, and that was the player's shadow would get casted above the entrance walls, as you see here. So I made it so the cave entrance would change sorting layer when the player had entered the entrance. Then it was time to make some transitions when the player enters or exits the cave. So it fades black when the player enters and fades white when the player exits. Well, it was very easy. I just changed the opacity in the animation and it worked. Well, I also wanted to add a new boss, but I knew I couldn't finish it this week. So I decided to just design an overall design. I'm not sure if I like it, but you guys can tell me what you think in the comments. I also want to make the cave dark and only give little visibility to the player. I'm following Chalakate, and I remember seeing him use a punch hole effect using shaders. He said it like it was very simple and easy, and I thought I could do it too, but god damn, I was wrong. This was the most frustrating thing I've ever tried to do. I spent over 4 hours trying to set this up, but with no luck, so I gave up and hoped tomorrow was going to be a bit easier. So after coming home from a long day at my new job, I was so exhausted and mentally tired, and only with 5 hours left there was no time to waste, so I had to figure out a way to create a fading shader for the punch hole. I started off by finding tutorials and hoped that maybe brackets could help me, but soon realized that shaders work differently from sprites to UI elements. Since his shader tutorial was made for sprites and I was making it for UI, I got the most annoying error ever, and that was the missing property stencil error. That error occurs when you're using a mask for the UI elements, so I had to find a workaround, and god damn, I struggled with this. I found a code that could inverse the mask, but I still had to use the mask component, so that didn't work, and time was still ticking, and I was getting more and more frustrated and tired, and I was slowly losing hope. I asked a good old friend for advice, but that son of a bitch was not to any help. He kept saying stuff that weren't even available in Unity, and even said the same shit like 100 times. I gave up on ChatGPT, and with only 1 hour left, I was getting desperate to find a solution. I stumbled on this guy that could create holes using the default UI shader, but just changing some numbers, so I just did what he did, and it worked. The only problem was that I couldn't apply a shader on a shader, since I wanted the circle to gradually fade to black, but I felt like I was on the right path. I just had to think outside the box, so I came up with the idea of creating a new UI element with a shader that would be transparent in the middle and gradually fades to black. This time ChatGPT was actually quite helpful, and I figured it out pretty quickly. With 15 minutes left, I finally did it. I was so stoked with the result, and it was just how I imagined it to be. This also brings us to the end of the video, and I just want to say thank you all for all the encouraging words and support. It really keeps me going, and I really appreciate it. So thank you guys so much, and if you're new around here or you liked the video, please consider subscribing or like. It will mean the world to me. I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.